So in this lesson, we're going to be going through input and output devices. Okay, but specifically, we're going to be talking here about uh, input devices. Okay, so just a little thing here for you to think about how many inputs and output devices you can name. But in terms of input devices, now an input device is a way in which we give data or instructions to the computer. Now there are example hardware here, so they come into different categories. Direct key press input devices will be keyboards, because of course that's where you got keys that you can press. And you can have concept keyboards that allows you to be able to have limited functionality. For example, if you go to a supermarket, the keyboards there might be used to select which items you are looking to scan, and those would then be specifically specialized keyboards. And then we got discrete buttons, such as ones embedded to the side of like a mobile phone to increase and decrease the volume, for example, or to lock your screen. Right, then we have pointers. We have a mouse as a typical example of a pointer input device, and we have a trackpad, which is something that might be embedded onto a laptop or a device that you might find in a shop. Okay, a stylus used on a tablet or a graphics tablet, and then a tablet in itself will have a touch screen. Okay, we have audio inputs. An audio input would be, let's say, a microphone or a telephone handset. Visual inputs, we have camera itself to take a picture. We have a motion sensor, so if you walk in through, let's say, to the front of Sainsbury's or Asda or anywhere else, you have a sensor that detects your motion, and then it might then open the door. So that's a visual input. And we have something known as an object sensor that senses when something is present. For example, if you have some mirrors these days, if you stand in front of the mirror and you maybe wave your hand, it might turn on the light in the background, so it's sensing there's an object there in place. And then we have something known as a gaze sensor. So again, if you look at something like on an iPhone 10 or the newer Samsungs as well, if by gazing at the screen, it senses that you are who you are, and then uses biometrics then to allow you to use your device. And then we have sensors, for example, an environmental. Basically, this is where we use it in an environmental setting. So we think about, for example, sensing when it rains to then turn on, let's say, a cover of. If you think about where that might be applied in a tennis match or a football match or something, where by detecting water coming down, then we would then put on the cover. Okay, and sensors can also be used in terms of detecting in a car, for example, how far away you are from an object, and then you might hear the beep coming through in the car. Right, so then we have electromagnetic inputs as well. So we have a card reader, for example, and then also a receiver. Right, in terms of where each one of these things are going to be used, so we think about a keyboard. We might use a keyboard in an ATM, so where we take money out, where you put your pin into it. An EPOS system, so this is an electronic point of sale system. So you go into Sainsbury's or Tesco's or whatever it is, they're using an EPOS system. So you might have to press a key on the keyboard there. In terms of a pointer, we're using mobile devices as well as on a computer. Audio will be used in terms of voice narration, so it's known as natural language. So for example, if you're in your car and your car has a built-in system where you can give a voice narration, then that will be an application there. Right, so here is where your exam questions might come from. So I'm going to briefly discuss each one of these concepts here. So OMR stands for optical mark reader. Okay, optical mark reader, and what that does is looks for shades on a particular piece of paper. So if you think about the lottery tickets, where you might shade a particular spot, and then what that would then do is go into a device. That device would read where that shade is and match that to your input. Okay, so read a bit more about OMR if you need to. OCR is known as the optical character recognition, and what that does is converts pictures, as in a picture of a text, to its equivalent text in the computer's memory. So if, for example, you had a document that was previously typed up, you can scan that document in and use the OMR software to determine the text. Of course, OCR is only as good as the number of characters that it can recognize. So some cases it would not recognize perfectly all of the characters. Hence, it might, for example, find, let's assume we scan this whole page here in, and because the G here might look like similar to a Y, it might try to recognize that and think that that's a Y instead. And also things like maybe the colon, it might not fully recognize, so it would try its best to match what the picture, what it can recognize of each character, to what it thinks it is. Okay. And ANPR is basically automatic number plate recognition. This is used by the police and to be able to determine the cars. So for example, it will use something similar to OCR here. So a picture, if someone's driving fast along the road, a picture of their number plate is taken. That picture then finds out each character on that number plate, determines who owns that car, and of course then the police are able to send a ticket to their home. Right, sensors. Right, in terms of where sensors are used in security, alarm systems, and also in terms of electromagnetic, we use it in payment. Now, so this here is known as a magnetic ink character recognition, and so if we go into the back of a card, as in a credit card, there is a magnetic strip at the back of that, and the electromagnetic input there. So when you swipe it, back in the day, all we used to be able to do is to swipe a card, and then that reads the information into it. These days you've got contactless that we can use as well. Right, so here's a scenario for you. Have a read of the scenario. Again, pause this here if you need to, and then have a read of the scenario and come up with an answer. Now notice it's an evaluate question you're being asked here, so that means you need to be able to give both the for and against part of the answer. Again, here's a couple more questions for you to reflect on. In this case, I'm not giving answers, but make sure you try and attempt the questions. Okay, that will conclude this lesson.